Another great trope too for your fantasy protagonist is the "I don't want it"
Yeah.
trope, right? It's just constantly like
Yeah.
he's like, "I
I'm
don't
not
want
a
to."
lord.
He doesn't want to be a lord. He
Yeah.
doesn't want to be a
They try
legend.
and call him a prince or something, and he's like, I'm not a prince. And they're like, all right, lord. And he's like, I guess I'll settle for that. We'll compromise. Welcome, friends, to episode 284 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And this week we discuss the first half of Robert Jordan's 1990 novel, The Great Hunt. We are back in the series Wheel of Time. It's been around 2 years. I was looking since we last covered this. We did, I think, 5 episodes, 3 on the first book, 2 on the show. It was a lot of coverage, but it's been a little while, so I'm curious, like, where are you at with this series, James? Have you thought about it much since we read it? And how excited are you to get back into it?
It's the kind of fantasy that I found myself going to when I was younger, and I veered away from it for a long time. And reading Eye of the World for the podcast kind of pulled me back in, because I was aware of Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series and how momentous that was for that era. We have some authors these days that are like massive, you have your George R. R. Martins and your Brandon Sandersons and things like that. Those authors are like these sort of beacons in fantasy, and getting a chance to read it for the podcast was so much fun for me that I was like, man, I really want to go read more fantasy, and specifically that style of fantasy, that kind of like epic fantasy.
Yeah.
So I went and read a lot more. But because I remember talking to you about it, I was like, I'd love to continue the series. And you're like, well,
specifically, you went and read Sanderson.
Yeah, Sanderson.
Yeah.
And because I was like, okay, well, Sanderson finishes the Wheel of Time, and I've heard great things about his work. And then I read like all of Sanderson. I read like all the entire Cosmere in the last 2 years. Yeah. This is kind of what set me on that path, and like it's got me back into epic fantasy.
And Sanderson has said as much, but clearly a big influence on him was Robert Jordan. He talked
massive.
about how reading these books was super inspirational for him. He thought it was like some of the best stuff he'd ever read.
Yeah, to our listeners, if you haven't heard the story, Robert Jordan unfortunately passed away and wasn't able to finish his series.
We talk about that in our second episode on the book, by the way. I went back and listened to a little bit of our coverage. We didn't get to that in the first episode because there was so much to cover with just the book itself.
Yeah.
But the second episode we did on it, we talk about that, and we talk about Brandon Sanderson's eulogy he wrote. I recommend that if you haven't heard it, if you are curious about that.
Yeah, it's incredible because Robert Jordan's widow was his editor as well, and so she was very involved with handpicking the person who would finish the series based on his manuscripts. It's amazing stuff. And so this is just a series that I've really wanted to add to my knowledge of fantasy and just genre, nerdy stuff that I love. So I didn't do it for this podcast, hopefully so that I'm going in kind of blind still with Wheel of Time, and it's this massive series that I know has a really big following. So I can't tell you how excited I am to continue on. And, this first half it's been interesting because there's a lot of expectations, right?
Yeah. I've talked a lot about my history with this series, how it was a foundational one for me that I read probably late 90s, early 2000s, and up to a certain point, I was following along with it basically until Robert Jordan passed away. It always reminds me of a specific time. Like I remember reading like this book we're reading now. I think I was in 8th grade when I read it. You know what I mean? So like it takes me back immediately.
I wanted to ask you this too. I know that I've heard other authors speak about like the idea of YA. Now this isn't YA because of some of like the brutality in it, but some of the interpersonal connections and some of the things that characters are motivated by feel pretty YA some of the time. And
it's still in a very YA mode at this point.
Yeah. Does that kind of shift, I assume, as time goes on?
Yeah, I would say so. These characters start out basically in their teens. I don't know that we get specific ages, and maybe we did and I've just forgotten them, but they feel very much like teenagers, right? And this is a 14-book, I think, series. Yeah, they age over time. And as they age, they grow into adults and they begin behaving more like adults. And so I think the series does start to grow up. And it's not always, I like, there is an appeal to the young protagonist. So I do think people look at these early books with a fondness for that reason too, because because our characters are so new, they're the first time out of Two Rivers, everything's this, exciting experience, and they're so bumbling and
That's what I
awkward
was
at
gonna say.
times. And like there's an appeal to that I think draws people to YA. And then I don't know what the rules, I mean, there aren't any rules as far as I know about like what is and what isn't okay in a YA novel. The brutality and stuff you mentioned in here, I'm sure there are YA novels that have equal stuff like this.
Oh, yeah, I guess that's
There's
true.
YA
Yeah.
novels. There's a whole discourse right now going on about YA novels and like how explicit the sex scenes can be in them. Because
Well, I'm curious
there's
too.
no rule about it. It's just all marketing. It's like, do you want to market to teenagers or not? And then even when you're doing that, are you actually marketing to like younger women who are maybe not in that teenage demographic, but still really love that YA, or men, but it's a lot of younger women really are drawn to YA. So are you actually marketing to them and not teenagers? There's like a whole discourse about that right
Yeah.
now.
Well, I've heard like on the marketing side too, there's weird, especially historically weird stuff with like if a woman wrote a
Oh
series
yeah,
like this, it would be probably considered YA.
that too. From outside perspectives, from in within the industry perspectives, people look at women writing younger characters and immediately label it as YA.
Yeah.
Whereas someone like Martin can write Game of Thrones, have a bunch of children as the protagonist for the most part, and not ever be at risk of being called YA. So yeah, those are all debates to have. But a little bit beyond the scope of what we're talking about here, other than Robert Jordan's books, like they continue to kind of be like straddle that line. Even this book gets released in 2 volumes eventually, like later on. And we talked about how they did a similar thing through Eye of the World, and they tried to market it more towards that younger audience when they re-released it later. This book does come out in 1990, but later in 2004, it gets split into 2 separate books called The Hunt Begins and New Threads in the Pattern. I think that might have been along that same trend of trying to like market it to younger audiences with like books that aren't quite so intimidating in their length.
I think Jordan did some interesting things here with like sort of what you do with a sequel, right? You're rehashing enough to have it feel familiar, kind of
Mhm.
start up,
Yeah, he always
action.
does that. Like, get used to that as you go forward. There's always a little bit in the first like 100 pages or so where characters are literally recapping like
Yeah.
what has happened so far, where they're at mentally, what the current like struggle is, and they'll even like reintroduce characters and he'll describe them in the same ways he described them in the last book.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on that? Because I think that is a little bit divisive. I think in a series this big, I do think people kind of appreciate the like help, but it does also kind of pad it out in a way, right? And like add to that already huge word count.
I felt like we didn't really jump into the adventure proper. Now, I think some of the stuff that was in this first season of the show, they took from the beginning of this, so I was already somewhat aware of it, but it felt
Yeah.
like we didn't jump into the hunt per se for like a third of the book.
Season 1 already got a little bit into this book.
Hmm.
This is a good way to talk about how we're going to approach this thing. And as far as we know, what we've heard, this second season of the show actually goes into book 3 a pretty significant amount. But we're not going to read book 3 right now. But I would say our plan would be if this show gets renewed and we are going to get a third season, which I hope we do, and it looks like something we want to cover at some point, we'll probably will squeeze in a book 3 coverage. Whether it's just like a standalone at some point, we'll do a couple episodes on it, and then later we'll jump into, because I assume by then we'll be on to like book 4 or 5, who knows, for a third season. We'll just have to kind of keep our eyes on it. But for now, we're going to be covering some stuff here that already happened, and then there's going to be some stuff in the show that we haven't got to yet, and it'll technically be book spoilers, but that's just kind of the way it's panning out for us.
We talked about the characters some, just to get into some of my general thoughts here with this book.
Yeah.
Expectations were high. I think like the first book was introducing the characters. There wasn't a lot more that you can do than go on one kind of linear adventure. There are like multiple, obviously continuing plot lines that are happening simultaneously, that kind of stuff. I just mean like this already feels like it's starting to expand on the world a lot. We're getting a lot more of the Aes Sedai. Fairly early on, he introduced a mechanic in a world that a 14 book series, I would have assumed the mechanic would be introduced like book 8 or 9. The way that this is starting to complicate and add so many characters, it feels like he's doing familiar things and starting up an adventure, and then at the same time saying, okay, now we get to take a real step into this world that I've designed. And you can just feel that even still we're sort of in the startup of what the story could be.
This is like starting to lay the groundwork for what Wheel of Time books are going to look like going forward. And you can see how he starts bringing in all sorts of new characters every time, and how over the course of 14 books, if he's doing that with every book, which he does,
Yeah.
the sprawl of this, the number of named characters that he asks you to remember, and the number of locations, the number of, like, it gets
Factions.
really truly huge.
Yeah.
And
it's
if you're
starting to get
really
pretty
good
big.
at that, and like some people are awesome at it and they hold it all in their heads, and like, you know, they really live in it. And it's, I think it helps if it's like you don't read a lot of other stuff and it's like this is the main thing that you put a lot of your imagination into, and like
Yeah.
your memory when it comes to that stuff.
Yeah.
But I think, like, I've read a million, like not a million, but I've read a lot of books since I read these series, and going back now I'm getting refreshers, but like still I'm like, I struggle to remember all these names,
Yep.
all these places, and you know it. So I'll get some of that stuff wrong. I'm just not someone who has like a really good mind for lore and like,
Yeah.
you know, names, especially. Like I lose them a lot.
Yeah, I tend to be pretty good at it, but it takes a really, like, I'll tell you my process for reading this. And shout out, by the way, to people who run wiki pages out there, man. Like, they're dangerous for spoilers, but if you use
Yeah.
them correctly and you kind of know what you're doing, you can avoid that kind of stuff. You can look at like timeline paths, like
Mhm.
interactive maps and things like that. I like that kind of stuff because it helps
Yeah.
me really sink my teeth in. So I find Robert Jordan to be like a really interesting figure in fantasy, but as there's a lot of book to cover, and in our Eye of the World coverage, we did do a deep dive on him and his legacy and all that kind of stuff. I want to point people back to that first book's coverage.
And just so it's clear how we're going to cover this, the first half of the book is what we're doing today. Then we're going to do the first 4 episodes of season 2 all together next week. We'll come back, finish book 2, and then we'll return to the show, finish out the season. So we do kind of a back and forth thing. That's what you can look for over the next month. But let's move into the plot now. In the prologue, Balzaman presides over a clandestine meeting. In addition to Forsaken and Dark Friends, the meeting includes 2 Aes Sedai. The book then opens with major characters united at the city fortress of Faldara in Shienar, where the Amaryllis seat is traveling to. Shortly after her arrival, the fortress at Faldara is attacked by Trollocs and Myrddraal. The evil, twisted prisoner, Padan Fain, takes Mat's mysterious and powerful but tainted dagger, without which he would slowly die, as well as the Horn of Valir. In the wake of the attack, Rand has an audience with the Amaryllis seat and is told that he is the Dragon Reborn. As we've talked about, some of this is already in the first season. Like, they kind of did all this right at the end here. We got through Padan Fain, I think, already escaped with a dagger in the show. It's been a little while, but my memory is that some of this stuff has already happened.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna do a rewatch of the show, by the way, the first season, maybe
Yeah.
this week leading up to part of season 2, because I can't remember exactly what was in what, but I do remember like Moiraine and the Amaryllis seat
Yeah.
met, and then they had like a more intimate relationship, which I thought was cool in the show.
Yeah, totally. And here in the book, focus on this. It is interesting that like this is the first time I think Rand has met any other Aes Sedai. And I was like, oh wow, because like we've met a ton of them in the show, right?
Yeah, totally.
And a lot of them have been around, but this is actually the first time where he's doing that. He's very scared of the Amaryllis, and he wants to run away. Like, he spends the whole first part of the book kind of running around. But even before that, we get this prologue, which I definitely wanted to get your thoughts on. So I think this serves an interesting function in this book. But this prologue where like everyone's wearing masks and they're at a secret party. There's all these people, and you get little hints at like who they might actually be. It seems like there's a lot of like important people, rich people. But then there's like people from all different walks of life. There's like a person from the Tinkers is there. There's someone from like across the sea. There's 2 Aes Sedai among the numbers there. And the implication is that all these people are dark friends, and they're getting their sort of marching orders from Balzaman, who shows up with this mask on. You can see fire behind the eyes, and starts giving all these individualized directions that like everybody else isn't privy to. So they all have their like own marching orders, but they don't know what the other people's are. What was your thoughts on this opening, and how do you think it affects the rest of the book going forward?
Yeah, the paranoia. Just paranoia throughout. I'm constantly like, oh man, dark friend, dark friend,
Yeah,
dark friend.
because you're like,
Everyone's a
who
dark
were
friend.
those people? Like, oh, wasn't
Yeah.
there someone who looked like they were from this place? You know what I mean? Like, he did a really good job with that. It instills a lot of paranoia.
Yeah, paranoia everywhere. If you pick it up right from where book 1 ends, Rand and company fought at the Eye of the World, and they
Yep.
like there's these Forsaken people, and they you think that they've been defeated. Two
Yeah.
of the 13 or whatever have been defeated, and then you're throughout thinking, okay, like these seals are breaking. These seals are important in terms of like holding the Dark One back.
Yeah,
These
we keep hearing
Forsaken
about
are
the
showing
seals
up.
hold the Forsaken bound in, I think, Shaogul, and like they're weakening, maybe breaking, and
Mhm.
people, maybe they're starting to get out. Is the
Yeah.
implication?
So I'm constantly like, is that another Forsaken? Is that a Dark Friend? Is this person who they say they are? And then
Right.
the other layer to this, the other wrinkle is that we know that there's Aes Sedai or Aes Sedai. Aes Sedai, does it matter? Is it pretty similar?
I've given up on consistent pronunciation. Even listening back to our coverage, we pronounce things differently because I think as soon as we watch the show's pronunciation starts to get to us. But the audiobook, which I know we both listen to at times, it has its own pronunciation. And then I have my pronunciation that I grew up with. So
Yeah.
all of these things are just a big mess for me right now. And I've given up trying to be consistent with it.
Yeah. All right. So Aes Sedai, there's at least two at this party, and that leads me to, and then we hear about these Black Aja,
Yeah.
and so
Any
constantly
theories
I'm
about
like,
who these two are?
yes,
Early
it's
theories?
obvious to me.
Okay.
Who
Who are they?
So one of them is obvious. One is the Red Aja that's like constantly like interrogating people, and like they're freaking out about Rand, and the three, they can affect the pattern. What's the Taravan or something like that?
Tarviran.
She's like
Taviran?
constantly
Whatever.
asking
Yeah.
about those guys, and so
Yeah.
she feels like she's definitely one. And then there's multiple other,
Leandrin? Was that who you're talking about?
yeah, Leandrin, I think.
Leandrin, yeah. I have a list of characters because I'm, again, not great with the names. I think that's who you're talking about.
Yeah, Leandrin.
She's definitely, she's the one who's got the kind of petulant look, and she kind of like almost tortures somebody at one point when she's questioning them, and she can
Yeah.
like compel them to like want to answer her with like this needle thing that she does.
Seems evil to me. I don't know
She's
if she's,
definitely evil.
yeah.
So the question is, if someone seems evil, does that mean they're a dark friend, or are there evil people who can be shitty who aren't actually dark friends?
It's a great question.
We
Like I
don't know
said,
yet, right?
she could be a red herring in as a Red Aja. So
Yeah,
that's,
I mean, she could
that
just be
depends.
shitty, but like, does that mean she's a dark friend? I don't know.
Yeah. She seems like she's a prime candidate. And then like there's the one that's like inquisitive and sketchy that's currently with
Talking
parent
about Varen,
Varen,
the
yeah.
Brown,
And
who seems to
also,
have kind of guessed what's going on with Damarillin,
mhm,
Seat, and Moraine, who they have this like close friendship in the book that, as you said in the show, is portrayed as romantic. But I think is regardless a very interesting kind of secret relationship. They have secret plotting they're doing that the rest of the Aes Sedai don't know about,
mhm,
because they know about this prophecy
right.
that has to do with the Dragon Reborn, and they want to like shepherd the Dragon Reborn and make sure that he's around to be able to fight the Dark One because they see him as important. But they're worried because they're like, all the other Aes Sedai are going to see him as a false dragon and are going to want to get him gentled before he can, become what he needs to become.
Protect himself or
And
whatever. Yeah.
Varen sees through all of this and kind of calls them out on it.
Again, this could be a red herring. She just has like a sly smile and like a knowing look that maybe because she can like suss these things out, and she's very inquisitive and like wants all the knowledge, supposedly. Like that's like what that Aja is interested in, I believe. And so that's like part of her personality, but then at the same time there's always like a knowing look or a this or that
Yeah.
that makes me think. But then they've introduced here here at the end, there's another character that I'm convinced might be an Aja, which is the one who's like with Rand right now and like seducing Rand, but that's much later in this. That's about nearing the
You're
halfway
saying
point.
convinced might be a dark friend.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, no,
let's
might
circle
be
back
a-
to that.
Might be a secret Black Aja or something.
Yeah,
like that.
because
Yeah.
within the sisters of Tarvalon, the Aes Sedai, forgot their name for a second,
Yeah.
we hear that there is another Aja that no one talks about, the Black Aja, and you're not allowed to you're not supposed to mention this to them because it's supposed to be like a very taboo subject. But we've seen two at this meeting, which implies that maybe this is a real thing, and there is this like secret other group within there.
So we got in deep here, but just to talk about like the start of the story, how it's like
Yeah.
sort of propelling itself forward. It's cool because we quickly learn about this horn, and it's important because it can call the troops of the dead or something like
Yeah,
that.
so I was wondering
And
what your thoughts are on this horn and like what import it seems to play here?
I mean, it seems like the eye of the actually, the first book is the eye of the world. That's the
Hmm.
important magical item, a magical location. I think that's this for that, and the Great Hunt
Yeah.
is about this horn, and I'm interested to see like who that horn's getting blown. There's
Hmm.
no question in my mind that horn. Just who's gonna blow it.
Hmm.
And then we get, it keeps getting taken back and forth between the evil people and then Rand's people and Moraine in some ways.
Right.
I think the idea of that, the idea of having some powerful force that can come from the dead to help you fight is pretty awesome for a magical item. Like that's just awesome.
So we start also with Lan and Rand are like training,
Hmm.
like training with these like practice swords. And we get that wind come blowing in again. And a lot of these books start with this wind. And this one like physically hits Rand and like almost like knocks him over. Yeah.
Yeah, he describes it as a wall.
And Lan's like, oh, weird stuff happens when you're this close to the blight. And then like, yeah, I wanted to know what your thoughts are as we rejoin these characters. We rejoin Lan, who's taken, definitely like seems like he has a fondness for Rand here. It's taken him under his wing a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
There's a part where he's going to meet Amarillan and Lan like preps him. What'd you think of all that?
Interestingly, the chapter that just happened to be halfway through the book ended off on some stuff that was talking about this, and this idea of like Lan's motivations possibly being like slightly shifted, because originally he didn't care about these people from this valley town or mountain town, whatever it is, and it seems that through his somewhat romantic, or maybe they're just crushes. I can't remember how far it's gone in the book series so far. But they're definitely a couple, like in the future, in my opinion. And Nynaeve and
Are you talking about
Valon.
Nynaeve? Yeah.
Yeah, her influence on him and him kind of get more invested in these people in general brings back the idea of the Teravine or something, whatever that word is. Taviran brings back that idea that like these people can like they kind of pull people into their cause. So I thought it was interesting, and then Moraine even says as much at the that last chapter in this half. She says something about like whether you help them because your allegiance is slightly shifting towards Nynaeve, or if it's because they're Taviran and they're kind of pulling you into their orbit. I think that's what's going on here.
Yeah, I'm still not. I'm pretty sure that the three main dudes, Rand, Perrin, and Mat, are the three Taviran in the books. Yeah. And in the show, they expanded it out.
Oh yeah,
and it's Egwene right. And Nynaeve as well, I believe, are also Taviran. So that's like a slight difference, but it's interesting because I feel like Robert Jordan treats them as if they are. Also
they definitely
Taviran.
Feel like they are, yeah.
So they're like the most powerful. That's we keep hearing about how powerful they both are.
And one other,
it's like latent power.
The princess that Rand meets in the first book.
Yes,
is also
and Caemlyn, Elaine Tricond. She is also said to be very powerful. She's like the one other one they've mentioned. But we haven't seen her yet in this book at all. No. So that's just kind of a, leftover from the last book. We hear about the heron-marked blade here, and Lan actually talks a little bit about these swords, these Blade Master swords. And for the first time, we hear that this was actually Tam's sword, and he was a Blade Master. Mm-hmm. So what were your thoughts on these reveals and the swords that are, they said that you never have to sharpen them, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, very cool. Also very tropey a little bit, which I love about this genre. Like, it's like, it's part of,
we
it's
love,
one of the things
we love a magic sword in fantasy, right?
Sure. Yeah. And a mentor, like adoptive father that died to protect you and give you motivation. And now you have a piece of him that's always with you. And it's just so happens to be an incredibly powerful magical artifact. Is awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
I'm on board.
There's a lot of angst about whether or not he's really Rand's father. And he's like, he is my father, and I'm not an ailment. And he keeps saying, I will not be controlled. It's like a repeated refrain he keeps saying to himself. And
that brings up a great point, too, is like the characters, like you said, they're very angsty, and they make really dumb decisions, which, like, is good for long-term character growth because you get to show the characters kind of bumbling, like we've said. Man, they make some dumb decisions and just like rash decisions. And
which ones are standing out to you?
Rand, for sure. Definitely Rand. Mat, obviously.
No, what decision?
Oh, gosh. I mean, just constantly running off into battle or being swayed by this person to do something when they're like...
Not questioning, just being like,
and then just Rand throughout is, like you said, it's just constantly like, I will not be told what to do by anyone.
Yeah, he's very like, no one tells me what to do. I do what I want. He even if they're like clearly speaking from a place of wisdom that he doesn't have, he's just like, no, I will not do it. He gets very stubborn,
Sure.
which people call him out on. There's a part where he does something that is also very tropey, but to me, this is a trope that always works for me in the sense that it creates drama as long as it's not overdone. And that's when he is like mean to Perrin and Matt just so that they won't want to go with him. Because he's like, I need to go off on my own, and it's too dangerous for them to go with me, so I'm going to be a dick to them both. And then now all the characters are mad at each other, and you know that he was like faking it, but like Perrin and Matt are angry at him. And it drags on for a little while, but then it seems like they're starting to, they eventually it's revealed that like, no, I was doing that to push you guys away. So it doesn't go on for too long, because that's when I think it can start to wear thin. But like this trope always works on me. It creates some real dramatic tension.
I like it. I also feel like it's almost a hallmark of YA again. It's to pit the characters against each other, but it's not super nuanced.
It's kind of a shallow way, because like Rand basically is like, I am like too good for you guys now. You're dragging me down. You're making me look bad. I'm all high and mighty, and they start calling him Lord Rand. There's this repeated thing where like everybody's starting to call him a lord now. Apparently just because he like dresses better, but also just kind of like carries himself like a lord.
I mean, another great trope too for your fantasy protagonist is the "I don't want it" trope, right? It's just constantly like, he's like, I'm not
a lord.
He doesn't want to be a lord. He doesn't want to be a legend.
They try and call him a prince or something, and he's like, I'm not a prince. And they're like, all right, lord. And he's like, I guess I'll settle for that. We'll compromise.
He doesn't want powers. He doesn't want to be the dragon. He doesn't want to be a legend that's talked about for generations and stuff. He doesn't want any of it. And that reluctant hero is always going to be fun to start out.
I mean, what's the alternative? The guy who's just like, hell yeah, this is what I'm all about.
Yeah, I think that's what most people reading the books would do.
You don't see that as often, I guess, but maybe that would be interesting just for a change. I feel like Matt might be a little bit like that if he was actually the Dragon Reborn. I don't know. Unclear.
Yeah. It was funny too when in the first book, like Jordan went out of his way to be like, who is the Dragon Reborn? Which of the three boys? And then it's like, this book, it's like, he's the Dragon Reborn, and a lot of people know it. And people are being doled out this information, like some of our main characters, which is, it's always fun to see those reveals. Actually, a good moment of that tension that you're talking about between Matt, Perrin, and Rand was when he then revealed, and they were like, oh my God, we're sorry, you have so much going on, and you know, it makes a lot of sense to like how you were acting and that kind of thing. I thought that was a nice comeback around, because they were like, look at him, he has the flag, he wants to be the Dragon Reborn. He's like, no, I don't want it.
Look at his coat he's wearing that like Lan brought for him.
Yeah, and Moiraine is like,
I don't know.
Lon, yeah. Moiraine keeps setting him up for this kind of stuff too.
He's got Chekhov's dragon banner in his like saddlebag now.
When's he throwing that thing up? Yeah.
It seems important.
It does seem important. I think I'm pretty certain that was like in the Eye of the World when it dried up, right? Like that and the horn.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's a good. Yeah, I had forgotten that, but I think you're right now that you say that.
So, you know, magical items, I'm sure.
Well, whether or not it's magical, right? Like you use a banner, like people, there's a lot of talk about people raising their banners in a lot of fantasy, but it's in here too. And like, that's like a call to like, hey, I'm raising an army and and if you want to come fight for me, you're going to like follow this banner.
Yeah. So it's another great indicator.
The banner of the dragon, like literally that would be like hey, I'm gonna start some
the Dragon Reborn, which is another good thing to talk about here, which is a lot of characters are learning that he's the dragon, but like the public doesn't know that he's the Dragon Reborn, and you can feel like this is still signaling like this is the beginning of the story. Eventually, everyone will know he's the dragon, and the sort of things that he has to deal with as like public knowledge. He's the Dragon Reborn, and people are gunning for him, and you know, dark friends are all over the place. He's everywhere he goes. At some point, I assume in the story, he's going to be a target.
So what did you think about his relationship with some of our different characters here early? Like there's an interesting interaction between him and Egwene where Sheila is like, she's been going to see Pat and Fane in the dungeon. This is right before all the shit goes down, but they like run into each other.
Yeah.
And are like wrestling. And then there's like magic and stuff, and they're playing up. There's some like attraction, sexual tension here. They keep talking about they're both were like supposed to be destined to marry each other.
I think that just through these first two books, and maybe, you know, the story could take tons of twists and turns along the way and surprise me, but the fandom wants Egwene, is how I say it. I'm not sure if that's
I don't know. Yeah, maybe it is Egwene. Yeah. I always said Egwene growing up, but it's probably Egwene.
She and Rand will end up together, I think, long term. Whether there's other people that he's with along the way, that Egwene is with along the way, like I think ultimately they've talked about like they're destined to be together. They were always meant to marry, and like
Okay.
their sort of paths keep pulling them apart, which is sort of romantic in a sense. And I
Yeah.
like how it's set up and how I like their relationship. It feels real. It feels
If you had to give a
endearing.
percentage surety, where are you at with it?
That they'll end up
How sure you are that they're going to end up together?
at the by the very end of the series,
Yeah,
100%.
100%. Okay.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm willing to be completely wrong, but
I actually haven't
100%.
read the very last book or two, so I don't know for sure. But like
Yeah,
I have some thoughts. So, but I won't share because I don't want to spoil things.
yeah. I
Um,
like, granted, I like the idea of them having their individual stories being separate and everything. It just
mhm.
feels like if anything's faded in the story, that feels very strongly faded. But again, the story has an interesting look at fate, right? The idea of the pattern and the wheel weaves, and it's just everything is meant to be how it's going to be. And then and then I guess it like corrects itself throughout the different cycles or something like that, is what I'm picking up from Loyal, who's like one of my favorite characters.
Right. Yeah. So he was kind of new. He had just been introduced at the end of the third or the first book, but we saw a bit of him in the show, so maybe he's a little more familiar from that. But we're getting a little more of him here. Continues to be cool. I agree. He to me he still has Treebeard vibes going on, although he's not an int or whatever, but kind of a similar. But I wanted to ask you about a particular thing. So Rand early on starts hearing this like phantom laugh, and he starts feeling like he's being watched,
Hmm.
and he starts being paranoid. And then there's so much interiority in Robert Jordan's writing. That's something I was like definitely noticing in this book. Um, and I think it's a strength of the writing, but also some people probably bump up against it because there's so much of it, and I think it adds a lot of length. You get a lot of characters ruminating. You get a lot of characters thinking about what's happened to them so far, what their current like anxieties are, what they're wrestling with, and all of those like intricate thought patterns get cycled through with every chapter. They change a little bit over time, and we see like where they're at mentally throughout. The fact that he does this sets up the ability for him to have Rand start having this thing where there's like another voice in his head who's saying things to him, and it's
Yeah.
like I don't know if it's like his bad conscience or what, but it's like, oh no, you actually do want this, or like, yeah, give in to the Satan, and or laughing at him, and challenging things that he says about himself.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that interaction and what might be going on with him?
Yeah, I mean, with my knowledge of fantasy stories, if you're, there's a chance that it's his interior sort of evil self saying these things, but at the same time, like a whisper on the wind or something like that could be some other form of communication. And I think like we've already shown
So
how
like an
much.
outside force maybe
Well, we've
communicating
already
there.
shown how the taint, right? We've talked about this
Mm-hmm.
before. Man's side of the magic has been tainted, and I'm starting to get more of that just through the lore of
Yeah,
what they've talked about. It's like I think Lewis Theron Tellem, what's his name?
lose Theron
Lewis
Telemon. Yeah.
Telemon, yeah. Something happened. He like almost gave into it, or something. Something caused him to be the kinslayer now. And so like I think he possibly, or even before him, evil always had like a certain pull, and it was like wanting you to use it. And we've heard from the other side, the women's side of it. They've said like if you use too much of it, you could kill yourself. If
Right.
that kind of
That
stuff.
is a
So
risk. Yeah, you can burn yourself out.
I assume that there's a risk on the male side as well, and
Sure.
they've
Well,
overused
well,
it. And
this taint like it drives men mad, is what we've
yeah.
been told.
And so
Yeah.
now we know Rand has a connection to it, and I think that it's tempting him, right? It wants him to use it. I think it has to do with the magics tempting him, and I think like obviously the evil overlord, evil one, the darkness, is like kind of somehow involved in manipulating that, pushing and pulling him to try to get him to use it
So
in
that
ways.
could be like Balzamon himself, like talking through in his mind.
Is Balzamon one of the Forsaken, or is Balzamon the actual
The Balzamon is
overlord
the dark
entity?
one.
Oh, he is. Okay.
Yeah,
So yeah, and he
that's the
keeps
name for
getting
the dark one.
dreams. Obviously, the dream sequences, you can't take those with a grain of salt. You're like that
Yeah,
probably is happening. He ended up with a burn on his hand.
yeah.
That's like a physical representation of that interaction. So I think that like the evil entity is using the tainted magic from the men to try to pull him in, and they've said as much. They've said we want you to work for the dark side instead of becoming the dragon and that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
Now there is like a moment in that opening where the character, because we're in a certain character's point of view, when it's never revealed who he is,
Hmm.
but he is like looking around and like kind of like guessing at who people are, and then when Balzamon comes in, um, he's very surprised. He's like, "Really? He's here in human form to talk to us?"
Yeah.
And he's just like standing here with us. Like I did not expect this. Um, and so he is like some doubts, but then it seems like by the end of it, he's like, oh, okay, yeah, this is my marching orders from Balzamon. So it is interesting of like the shifting identities and like who is who and is everybody who they're purporting to be?
They keep giving us Paddock Fane's point of view as well. Something happened with him, and this is the interesting thing. I talked about this way back in book one. I like how when they went to Shadar
Logoth.
Logoth,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, when they went there, there was evil entities that didn't seem like they were the same as the evil entity that's the rival of Luce there in Telamon and
Mm-hmm.
Rand and that kind of stuff. So there's other evil entities, and it seems like they have different motivations. I think that there's some of that going on as well because Paddock Fane, like he wants the
Padden.
knife, Padden Fane,
Yeah.
he wants the dagger just like Matt does, and he's like keeps pursuing the dagger and feels better when he has the dagger. So they both have like that connection to whatever that evil is as well, it seems.
Totally. And then this whole breakout sequence is actually pretty brutal. Like there's like decapitated guards and they're like writing in blood on the walls, and we get this dark prophecy. It was like an important moment where it's like a prophecy from the evil side, and they're like, we don't hear these a lot, but they actually tend to come true as well, so we should pay attention to them. So yeah, I thought this whole part was pretty exciting. And then yeah, I guess we kind of got this in the show, but it was a little different. They kind of had it happen at the same time as what was happening at the Eye of the World.
Hmm.
So it's got a little jumbled there at the end, and I think that's part of it is they were shoving like this whole start of this book into that. But let's move on in the plot. Seeking to recover the horn, Ingtar Shinawa, a brave Shienaran warrior, leads a small group including Rand, Matt, Perrin, Loyal, Varen Mathwin, and about 20 Shienarans after the thieves, a band of Shadow Spawn and Dark Friends. To track them, they enlist Huron, a middle-aged Shienaran with a strange ability to smell things that other people can't, such as the ability to smell where there has been a battle, even if there is no trace of it. Using this sniffing ability, Huron is able to follow the scent of their quarry across the land. However, it is not long before Rand, Loyal, and Huron are accidentally separated from the party and transported to another world via a portal stone that they unknowingly slept beside and somehow activated. In the other world, Rand meets Balzamon and has a heron branded onto his palm in a fight. It's kind of a dream. Later, having determined that the portal stone transported them to the parallel world that essentially is the same but with a different timeline, they eventually find another portal stone with the help of Celine, a mysterious woman dressed in white whom they meet there. So we leave and we begin the hunt. Rand is with this group. Our three main dudes are back together, and they're with this Ingtar who we saw fight off a Myrddraal in the fight, so he seems pretty badass.
Yeah.
Like one-on-one after the Myrddraal had killed like 7 other people or something.
I want to talk about Perrin too because we have
Yeah.
he's like one of the characters we
Haven't
haven't,
talked about him much,
and he was a favorite of mine from the previous book, and I like the power system, and I'm liking it still just as much. I'm like, man, if there's a power that I want so far
Yeah.
from this world, I want wolf buddies, dude. I want
The wolf stuff's cool, right? Like he's able to reach out to them with his mind, and
he can
like,
send them images, and they have a name. He's Young Bull. He's like he already has his own name and stuff, and
yeah, because he like killed a couple dudes.
I'm super invested in Perrin's story, and like I want more of it going forward.
Yeah.
And this
Well,
this is the mechanic that I was,
you're in for a treat.
yeah, I've heard there's
He's one
12,
of the main characters.
12 other books, yeah. So this is that other mechanic that I said, typically I wouldn't think that a fantasy story would introduce like a multiverse until like an 8th, 9th, 10th book.
That's what you're talking
because
about. Here, yeah.
he falls asleep on this like portal stone.
Yeah.
And we think that maybe he used his powers or something happened and they transported into an alternate version of the world, and it said that the wheel weaves alternate versions all over the place
Yeah.
of possible. And in this version, the Trollocs won the Trolloc War,
Yeah.
and so they took down Artur
Hawkwing. Yeah.
Hawkwing, yeah. They took it. They ended up defeating him, which is completely opposite to the world they're from. It's like paled out, everything's pale. It's very cool.
There's like no people, like basically empty. It's and there's not even very many Trollocs, and they kind of hint that like, well, maybe after they killed all the humans, they started killing each other because that's just what Trollocs do.
And that just feels like it can spin off so rapidly. But it is cool because he kind of sectioned it off as like, you need these specific devices that are like, I think, more ancient than the magic of the Aes Sedai.
Yeah, there's like portal stones.
And so like that's cool that,
and these
like,
are somehow connected to like the way gates, or similar to the way gates.
I think the Aes Sedai, they said the Aes Sedai use that technology or that magic system to then create the ways in some way. I think it's cool. I think it's also like can be a bear to handle that in your fantasy story, because you're like, well, now somebody can pop through portals and go to alternate dimensions and bring people back from this or that. And I'm like, that can get kind of messy, but I trust that I hear great things about this story, so I'm assuming he handles it well. I just was surprised to see that in the second book. And it's very unexpected. Like, it took me on a really fun journey I didn't think I was going to get out of this great hunt that I thought was just going to be like trekking through forests and fields to find these people.
Even massive fans of the series, I think, will have criticism of certain parts and like things that go on too long, and like, certain books that maybe aren't as good as others. And so I don't think it's like this is regarded as a perfect series, even if people do love it. So yeah, there could be particular spots where it's like, maybe this got a little too much, or it got into the weeds over here. And I think looking at areas that could be problematic, I think is worth looking at. Like, oh, that could end up becoming kind of a distraction.
And when I say like I think there's enough fans of this book series to know that like it's worth reading. That's really how I feel about it.
So yeah, we have Varen here, who is actually sent to come join the other group because
she says she was sent.
Well, Egwene has a dream about Rand being in trouble. And it seems like she got sent after that dream, right? Like, was conveyed to her in some way. I think it happens in between the chapters, so we're not really clear. Like you said, that's what she says. There's some talk about maybe Egwene's something called a dreamer.
So she wants to find Moiraine, and Moiraine, like, they're getting on a ship, and they're heading towards what's the Aes Sedai, the White Tower, Tarvalon. So they're heading there, and which is really cool.
Tarvalon.
I'm excited to see them in a magic school as well.
Yeah.
Like that.
We've already seen Tarvalon in the show, by the way.
Yeah. But I mean, like, I'm excited to see them get trained in a magical school. Like that's fun for a fantasy story as well. They have a cool, like, I'm invested in their story just as much as I'm invested in.
We're starting to get a little bit of that already, right? Like some lessons. Suin like shows up and like gives Nynaeve and Egwene like a direct lesson, and we hear talk that like Nynaeve is going to be able to possibly enter as an accepted, which is like a level above novice, just because she's like older and so powerful already.
Yeah, pretty cool stuff. Yeah,
interesting.
I'm excited to see what spins out of that, because even in this we get the seat, the Amyrlin seat comes and trains them at one point, and that's a whole fun exchange because the powers like are so. They're not very defined yet, which I like is part of the fun of it, is getting some of this shown, like what the power system can do.
Yeah, she shows off some stuff that they could do, right?
She can like use the air to lock someone in place, which I thought was awesome.
Mm-hmm. She makes a sword out of like ice or something.
Just I thought that was also air or something like that.
Yeah, it's like she uses air, I think, to like cool ice crystals into a sword or something.
Yeah. And then what's awesome is she uses that on Nynaeve, and Nynaeve is all frustrated and immediately learns how to use it right back to her.
Throws her against the wall at one point.
Cool to see her progressing so quickly, and her potential is going to be insane, I'm sure.
Nynaeve doesn't do a whole lot here other than be kind of angsty. She's got this whole thing where like her and Lon keep going off and having conversations, and they don't seem to be going well. We're not really privy to exactly what's being discussed, but she's like angry at him, and I think he's basically been telling her that they like can't pursue this romance. At the same time, she's also very frustrated with how the Aes Sedai are treating her and not like respecting her as a wisdom. Instead, they're treating her like a novice, essentially. And then it does seem like they're going to compromise a little bit with this whole accepted thing. But she is not one who, much like Rand, does not seem very open to people like telling her what to do.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've described her in the first book as like an older sister kind of to the group, and she like that's holding true. Like she definitely is like ready to jump in and fight for any of her family basically back from where they're from and everything. What's the field called? Something Fields or
Emmons Field.
Emmons Field, yeah, they're very protective of each other. We've heard in the first book some about like the Manetherin people, right?
Yeah, it's like the kingdom from before that they're
Yeah,
like descended from.
right. So I can already see,
And
and they're
Lon's
talking
like
about
giving him, like Lon's like telling him stuff to say and like little symbols to show to be like Manetherin is like here, like gives him a
yeah.
little pin, I think, or
And they said that they're
something.
very
And
stubborn, and like
yeah,
that holds true for most of these our main characters. And then we're hearing lineage seems like it's going to become important, which is is another big fantasy thing. And we're hearing about the Hawkwing descendants that are possibly coming ashore, or something like that is being said by
oh yeah.
some of the characters. So I'm like, there's another battle going on outside of the hunt currently that we're not getting a ton of information on yet.
So going over to the Dark One side, we have Padden Fane has the horn and he has the dagger and he's on the run and they're chasing him. And at one point they get to a town where like people have all been killed and there's a Myrddraal that has been like nailed to a door. And they're like,
Yeah.
how did like what did this? And then like we get revealed in a subsequent chapter that it was Padden Fane who actually did it.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on him now as a figure?
I feel like the Myrddraal are of the Dark One, and he's kind of working alongside them. So maybe these evil entities have some connection, because I think of him as connected to the dagger in
Right.
some ways, but then he's also getting orders, or
Yeah,
he's
he's
working
kind of
alongside them.
he's like kind of a wild card, right? Like, yeah, I guess it is because he's kind of being pulled in multiple directions, but yeah, he's kind of a wild card in that sense of like he'll kill Myrddraal if he needs to, like.
Yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't care, but he also like commands them through fear, and like they're all afraid of him. So he's clearly got like power.
He puts the dagger on top of the chest. At one point, he ends up with the chest that has the horn in it. He puts the
Mhm.
dagger on top of the chest, and he knows none of the Trollocs and none of the evil dark friends are going to come up and touch it, because they saw him use it in some
Yeah,
way. Use the
they're all
power
afraid
from it.
of that power from Shadow Logoth. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's this like other ancient evil.
So he's developing something that maybe Matt could at some point. But yeah, did we get his point of view? I like getting in the point of
Yeah.
view of these evil characters too, because like you hear how like sadistic he is. He like loved slamming the hammer down to like pin that guy to the wall.
This is another good point to talk about something that Jordan begins to do here and he continues to do later, and that's where he starts introducing all kinds of like other POVs. It's not just our main three here. It's not just Emmons Field folk. We get Padden Fame. We get like a Domon's point of view at one point. Like we
I
get
still haven't figured out why. Yeah, we've gotten a couple of from him, and I can't figure out what he means to this. I remember he was from the previous book, but I don't get what he's in.
He's
this
like a
one
ship
for.
captain, and he's getting like they're trying to get him to transport Dark Friends, I think.
Yeah.
At one point, so he's trying to they're trying to hire him to do stuff. Yeah, it's a little unclear.
If an author is going to do a POV like that, though, I assume this character is going to have some big import. So I just don't know why.
At some point.
Yeah.
I wanted to sing Jordan's praises a little bit here because I think this is very hard to do well, and I do think he does it well. Is it perfect all the time? No. Can you criticize some of the ways he writes women? I've heard many women do that.
Yeah.
However, I just think it's such a difficult thing to write from all these different perspectives and have them feel different enough to stand out. And I think he does it, and like at least pretty well. And like that's actually a big talent I think he is showing off here. And I think a lot of new writers have read this and think that that's something that they should be doing. And this is where I think a lot of people struggle because they don't realize how hard it is to actually pull that off.
Yeah, to have the voice be so different. I can't imagine even to have like a random side character who pops in, like our prologue is from the POV of some person we might never see again.
Yeah.
And like you can't have that character sound like any of the other previous characters you've written.
Yeah. And you got to quickly establish them. It's a challenge, definitely from a writing point of view.
Speaking of the POVs, though, some of my favorite POVs are when we get Moiraine's POV, because we're getting a lot of lore information. We're getting a lot of like the plan, the prophecies, the things that like I like to, sink my teeth into, and then you get to get more invested in everybody's story along the way. There's a little part of me from the first book that was like, is Moiraine always going to have, or really the 5 characters' best interests at heart? And I'm pretty certain at this point that she's like the Gandalf of the group, and she goes away to do research to figure out, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of like, rhythmic things to like a Tolkien or something like that. And I did feel that throughout, which I kind of expected, but in a book 2 to have it be like, here's the setup, and then we're going to go on this like trek, this journey towards something is very reminiscent of running through the hills with Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas,
Yeah.
and then you get like your dagger feels very ring-like in some ways, and so
Yeah.
I like it's
We
familiar,
talked a lot
but it's
about this
different.
with our Eye of the World coverage before, but there's an obvious and very heavy influence from Lord of the Rings, especially in these early books. And I think that does, yeah, that definitely carries over here.
I guess I just wanted to note that it didn't like take a drastic step in a different direction yet, but I assume
Yeah.
that it continues to be more different as it goes on.
You know, something about these other worlds when they were traveling around in there, I kept thinking of the Neverending Story was one that I went to.
It's so crazy that you say that because
Yeah.
the when they find this woman, I forget her name right now. What's her name?
Celine.
Celine. She seems so much like the princess for some
Maybe
reason
that's what
in
it was.
Neverending Story to me.
There's like a weird frog creature that she's like fighting off, and Rand has to
white,
shoot.
It's like white sands and dust.
Yeah, it's kind of
and-
surreal. What are your thoughts on her now that we brought her up?
I think she might be a secret Aes Sedai. I've said that already.
Okay, he's asked her a couple times if she's Aes Sedai. She does not seem to like that question very much.
Exactly.
There's one thing we know about her for sure. That's that she's very hot.
She is. Everyone's like just like mouth agape at all times.
Yeah. What's your thought on that, on her level of hotness and how frequently it's described here?
Clearly there to tempt everyone. Like she's not who she says she is. I don't know for sure that she's going to be magical, but like something's going on here. She's like convincing. She's trying to like convince Rand to take up the horn.
Yeah, she's like, take the horn, and whoever has the horn, it's gonna be me and you. Like, we're gonna be together. And Rand's like, all right. And he's
Take off
starting to
the
think
necklace.
of Egwene. He's like, oh, Egwene's gonna be jealous of me, and she's flirtatious with him. Yeah, definitely seems to be like, at first it's like treated like she's just very hot, but then like I do think as we continue to read, clearly there's some sort of influence beyond just physical attractiveness. I think that's coming from her.
She also has access to crazy lore that like Loyal doesn't know, and
Yeah.
she knows. I'm like, this is this going to be one of the situations where like they take the necklace off and they're like 200 years old. They keep signaling white too. They're like white dress. She turns away. She's not listening to Rand because she's frustrated with him because he keeps turning down. Like she tells him to throw away the dagger and she tells him to keep the horn, and he doesn't want to do either of those things.
Yep.
And she keeps getting frustrated and she turns away, and it's her white cloak or her white dress flaps. And the only other character that signaled that was when he was going to sleep at one point. Egwene saw that vision that we talked about already. In the visions, she saw that he was in danger, and then there was like a character cloaked in white over him. So I'm like, that's this character, I think, at least.
Yeah, so she's dreaming about this threat, particularly from Celine. Let me read this next section, and then we can kind of wrap up what happens in this first half. Rand is able to use one of these portal stones to return to their own world, albeit much farther ahead of the rest of the group, and even the Dark Friends and Shadow Spawn. Shortly afterward, they recover the horn and the dagger by sneaking into the enemy's camp, which they found simply by waiting for them to catch up. Ingtar's group had earlier been mystified and confused at the disappearance of Rand and the other two, but they managed to continue tracking the Dark Friends. However, as Perrin pretends to be another sniffer like Huron, secretly he is using his wolf sense, his ability to talk to wolves, to ask nearby wolves which way the Dark Friends and Shadowspawn went. Egwene and Nynaeve leave Faldara at the same time as Ingtar's party, along with the Amarillan and Moraine Damodred. As they head for Tar Valon, they are visited by the Amarillan and other Aes Sedai who give them lessons. Okay, so that's kind of where we leave off here. There's also this moment here at the end, which is what I was kind of getting to, where they stop at an inn after getting the horn and everything, and they're like questioned by this other captain guy who doesn't believe at first that they are who they say they are. And then Celine is like not liking being questioned, and then she leaves in the night, and she's just like, I'll be ahead at the I'll see you at the next stop. Yeah.
And they had set a guard watch, and she just disappeared. The guards never saw her leave or anything like that. So she's evil or magical. Something's going on here.
Okay.
Yeah.
What did you think about Rand's ability to just like go into the camp and take the dagger and the horn?
Yeah, pretty wild. I did not think they would. I didn't think they'd get the horn back until the end of the book. Honestly, I thought that was going to be the rest of the story, is trying to track it down, and it's kind of nice that it's not going to be the rest of the book, because now it could be taken again. But again, at some point it starts to feel repetitive.
Changing hands,
so
at least.
I don't know how often that's going to happen throughout. Totally expected her to run off with it when she was gone. I was like, oh, she took the horn for sure.
Do we know for sure that she hasn't? Have we seen?
No, I don't think so. But Rand didn't say anything. Like they left.
Yeah, you would
and
think he
didn't
would
say-
have noticed. Yeah, I'm actually I don't remember this part exactly, so I can't tell you. Yeah, man, it's been fun to reread this part and like little bits that I do remember, a lot of stuff I didn't. We see Rand being kind of badass at multiple moments. He shoots these frog creatures in the eye, and he shoots like 5 arrows and kills 5 of them.
Yeah. Oh, that brings up a great point. He has like a void thing
Yeah.
that supposedly his father Tam he taught, and it's like maybe this is like in the zone kind of thing, but like it seems magical.
Well, he realizes that every time he goes to the void,
yeah,
that like Saidin's there waiting for him. Like the energy is there. It's like tied. There two things seem kind of tied
and
together.
specifically the taint though too. Like when he goes to tap it, he can feel the taint as well, and which it never stops being funny.
Yeah,
every way you say it.
Yeah, can't avoid the taint.
Man. He's using it, and then at some points it like shatters into like glass shards, and so I'm trying to figure out still whether that's like something he developed because he's the dragon, or if that's something he developed like outside of that, whether he would have that ability no matter what, because Tam kind of taught it to him.
Yeah, it seems like a method of focus to me. Like it's like you go into the void and you're not touched by any emotions. Reminds me a little bit of like Stoicism as like a philosophy, and the idea that you like become hard as stone and like nothing can affect you. And then from that place, it seems like he has like a direct line to his magic. And then that magic itself is tainted. So he has this debate about whether or not he should be using it at all. But then we get the implication of like when he's doing these great acts, like killing these 5 creatures with 5 shots of the bow. There's some implication like maybe he was using the magic to assist the shots, right?
That's what I think. Yeah, it's gotten to that point. Like maybe he wasn't able to tap into that before.
Maybe he wasn't even aware that he's doing it, but it's happening.
But it set him up to now he can use that in addition to the powers. Yeah.
But he's trying to resist it, and he fights a bunch of the shadow spawn with this heron marked blade, and he's not a blade master himself, but he's been learning from Lon, which by the way, Lon not a blade master, yet he talks about how he could teach him to be one.
I assume that means you're a secret blade master. Like I don't know.
Isn't that interesting though? But it's like he's not one, but it's like I can teach you to be one, and you're like, wait, if you could teach me to be one, shouldn't you be one?
Well, Lon is definitely he's turned away all titles, all that kind of stuff. I'm sure he's not interested in flaunting that kind of thing anyway. He's like, I don't need a heron mark blade. Like I can do it with whatever blade I have.
It makes you think there might be something there though, right? Like there's some reason that we just haven't gotten yet.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, and that's also interesting too. Like we get some stories from when the day that Moiraine and Lon met, and like that was like in the last chapter there, right before we stopped, where they're talking about like she's asking him like, does he regret it? Does he feel like it's there's a specific wording that's used that I'm not gonna be able to pull right now, but is it something that he regrets basically? And he keeps saying no, and then she's like, well, I gave your title over to title is a funny way of putting it, but basically I gave your name over to a different person. If I die, you're gonna be compelled to go to that other Aes Sedai figure, and he's like not happy about that.
That's the warder thing,
right?
Of the bond, like the bond will move.
So yeah, he's not happy about that. He had no choice in the matter, and this is the first time that he was compelled by Moiraine. They talk about, and that relationship is very interesting to me because it seems not like it's not romantic, but it's so close. We talked about this in the first book as well. It's so close that it might as well be, and in some ways it's closer. And seeing how Nynaeve is clearly like his want, but this is his duty. And like how that's going to come about. And now, I think the precedent has been set. Apparently she can like bequeath Lon to somebody if she were to die. Yeah. So that might happen to Nynaeve
magically do so. Yeah. Interesting theories. I'm not going to weigh in on any of that. I'll just note here that they stop at an inn called the Nine Rings, which I thought maybe was a reference to Lord of the Rings. Isn't it like the nine rings given to the Lords of Men or something?
Yeah, I think so.
So I thought that might be a reference. He says it's like connected to like one of his favorite stories growing up, and he's like, I guess it is still one of my favorites, which I thought was maybe a little nod towards Lord of the Rings.
Must be, right? Yeah.
I guess this is where we're going to leave it for now. We are going to watch the first 4 episodes of season 2 next week. So hopefully you stick around for that. If you like this episode, please let us know in the form of a rating and review on whatever app you chose to listen on.
Also, make sure you connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.
Yeah, blue sky now. And if you'd like to support this podcast in another way, we also have a Patreon, which we'd love to have your support on. It would greatly help us out if you wanted to do that. So definitely check that out if you're even curious about it. and that's patreon.com/inktofilm.
And thank you to Serious Beat for the use of our intro and outro music. It's the track The Chosen.
All right, so all that's left to do is to get back into the show, which I'm so hopeful that they are able to sort of like right the course, because they got a little bit off course, I think, there at the end of season 1. So I'm going in optimistic, and we'll see. We'll come back next week, and we'll be honest with all of you and share our thoughts.
I'm excited. Hopefully they take some steps in the right direction. I want this to be a massive fantasy show that we get season after season of.
Yeah,
so here's hoping.
I mean, that would be cool. All right, until next time.
Keep adapting.